Mike did a fantastic job of pronouncing my first name. It's a bit of a consonant soup. I'm from Ireland. That's how you pronounce it on the right if you're a visual person. Take the word tiger, remove the R's at the end, and you've got Tadhg. To get here, I had a pretty convoluted journey. I spent most of my life in Ireland. And from there, I moved to a country in West Africa. And I'll buy anybody a drink who can name that one, based on the shape. Anybody? So that's Ghana. So I lived in northern Ghana for a couple of years, in 2008 and 2009, working for a small Canadian nonprofit around education delivery. And again, it really gave me a sense of perspective and some of the core values that I wanted to bring to my work when I moved to Canada. And when I started out in Canada, I started work with a digital agency as a technical project manager for them. And again, got a lot of experience with open source platforms. And the delivery of web projects for various clients. I also spent some time working for a startup organization in the web TV space. Really interesting experience in terms of understanding how the startup world works. And about 3 years ago, I got an opportunity to come on board with the city of Vancouver and lead what was then a web operations team through a digital journey and a digital strategy that they had just launched. So prior to 2012, the city of Vancouver had a very broad, disparate website with very little content management system underlying it. And they did a web redevelopment project, and I was brought in to lead that operations team moving forward. So I'll tell you a little bit about that journey, a little bit about the last 4 years in that position as the digital services manager for the city of Vancouver, and what are some of the things that we've been focused on. From there, I really want to spend some time talking about actual real-world case studies. And for those of you that are maybe developers or work with digital agencies in the audience, what I'd really urge you to think about as I go through these is, where are there parallels across to maybe your areas, your industries, the clients you're serving? How can you take some of these principles and adapt them across to your particular areas? So in particular, I'll talk a little bit about the main digital platform that we maintain, which is the Vancouver.ca website. I'll talk about a mobile app called Van Connect, which we've deployed in the last year and a half, and how that's enhancing service delivery for the citizens of the city of Vancouver. I'll speak a little bit about our digital infrastructure program, which on the ground looks like a really comprehensive network of Wi-Fi enabled spots. Towards the end, then I'll talk a little bit more about the data opportunity and where data is providing opportunity not only inside the city of Vancouver in terms of how we measure and evaluate the performance of our programs, but also out there in the real world where there's a huge opportunity to be had for providing services to residents through data. So to begin with, in terms of digital strategy, this is the fundamental challenge that governments are faced with. How can they be more agile under the diametrically opposed pressure of a consumer-driven technology adoption and the increasing need to minimize risk and reduce it? And that's a really interesting challenge when you look at, from a government perspective, whether it's municipal or provincial or federal, how do you stay the pace with the changing expectations of your citizenry, whose expectations are being driven by private sector, by their daily lives, by the interactions that they have on social networks, that and maintain your security and that need that you have inherently as a government organization to reduce risk and to protect those residents when you interface with them. And if you want to call it like the sort of fast pace of digital, the slow pace of government, how do those two meet and how do you continue to keep pace? So in 2012, the city of Vancouver started to look at itself from a digital perspective across a number of capability areas. So those capability areas included social, online, mobile, our infrastructures, so the wired and wireless networks that were supporting all of the three above, our actual organization within the city of Vancouver, how were we set up to deliver on these digital initiatives, and then the digital economy as a whole within the city of Vancouver. And we took a look at ourselves. We worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers as a consultant to come in and really evaluate where were we in our digital journey, in our digital maturity. And along the x-axis, you can see that for the most part, we were either absent or exploring in many of those verticals. Our infrastructure and data was a little bit more advanced, and our digital economy not necessarily because of what the city of Vancouver had been doing, but our digital economy was pretty advanced. We were fairly well renowned for having a tech infrastructure, a good base of tech companies. So that was sort of advanced into the enabled space. And in 2013, off the back of that work, we became the first Canadian municipality to actually issue a digital strategy. It was a 4-year plan, and it really signaled a commitment to transforming in general how City Hall was doing business and how City Hall was taking advantage of digital means in order to interface with its residents. That core goal was there to improve service to our residents, enhance citizen engagement, and that last point, to really support that burgeoning and growing tech economy that was happening in Vancouver. It was a really in-depth and lengthy process that included stakeholder engagement at a huge number of levels. So everything from the public to the tech community to members of staff and our corporate management team. And it was all boiled down. It started with almost 120 initiatives that were identified, and it was all boiled down into 15 priority initiatives, and I'll talk to you about those in a second, across 4 pillars over 4 years. We didn't just look inwardly, though. We looked around North America and around Canada and indeed into Europe to evaluate where were we on this evolution curve relative to other cities of a similar size and of a similar ambition. Vancouver's an interesting city in the sense that from a budget perspective, we're similar to a city of the same size of, say, Brampton in Ontario. But we're really, the ambition and the motivation that Vancouver has is a global city. It's got a global reputation. So we're a city with a small budget, but a global reputation. So we looked at other comparable cities around the world just to place ourselves on this maturity curve in 2012. And of those initiatives, I'm not going to go into this slide in depth, but there was a really in-depth and lengthy process to boil it down to actual achievable initiatives, of which there were 19, and those were further broken down into about 15 priorities. Now, we'll be here all day if I have to talk about 15 priorities. So I'm just going to talk about number 1, which is the enablement of city services across our digital platforms. A little bit about number 2, around the open data program and how we're using data both internally and externally to improve service delivery. And number 4, which is about expanding digital access throughout the city to our residents. But there are another 12 initiatives there that you can start diving into and looking at if you're interested on the City of Vancouver website. And the sense was that if we started to make progress on those 15 initiatives, on those 15 priorities, that we would start moving the dial in general on our digital maturity over the course of the 4-year strategy and move more towards that enabled and that connected space on that maturity curve. So I've talked a little bit about the 4 pillars, and this has been a really interesting way and a really powerful way to actually lay out the framework of the digital strategy within the City of Vancouver. We have our 4 pillars, the first one being engagement and access, and that's the pillar that my team is primarily involved in and responsible for. So that's about how well can citizens and our businesses interact with the city through digital channels. We have the infrastructure and assets pillar, critical, of course, to tie all of this together. Again, as we enter into a space where everything is creating data, if you don't have the underlying infrastructure in place, it's going to be a real struggle to connect that data to useful services. Our digital economy, again, talking about those businesses that need Vancouver to be a thriving, connected city for their businesses to advance. And then internally, as the City of Vancouver, how are we set up to deliver on this digital strategy? How is our digital culture and how is our workforce enabled to be digital? I'm going to focus on 1 and 2 today because those are the primary areas that I've been responsible for together with the team at the City of Vancouver. And first of all, I'd like to just start with the primary sort of digital platform that we're responsible for, that we deliver most of our services through. So in the last number of years, we've been really refining our thinking about how we define the value of Vancouver.ca. Many people see a website or historically have seen a website as sort of a bulletin board where you post content for people to learn about the story of the city. We're positioning it very differently in the digital services team at the city. We're positioning it as the gateway to a $50 million enterprise which has grown $10 million over the last 4 years as we've enabled more transactional services on our City of Vancouver website. So if you pivot that and you think about what that means to the organization and the potential for growth that lies with that, you start seeing Vancouver.ca and that delivery platform in an entirely new light. In 2012, we had a revolution. We spent 3 years in a large project to redevelop the City of Vancouver website, and since then we've taken a different approach. And that's one of evolution as opposed to revolution. We see the need for incremental, small steps towards achieving where we want to be with the City of Vancouver website. We have a really large and complex site with an extremely diverse user group amongst our residents, multiple internal stakeholders who all have different ambitions for the site and for their section of it. We attract about 30 million visits a year, and we have this sort of framework that has to support both transactions, information, and the ability to engage. So it's a really large and complex site, and the challenge with that is if you choose to employ revolution on something like that, there's always going to be a huge upheaval for your users, for your stakeholders, and for you as a team. So thinking about that and evolving that thinking over the last number of years, we've taken this evolution, not revolution approach. In terms of where we are in our journey on that, we're midway through that improve stage. So we repaired the site in 2012 and launched a new website. We've been focusing on incremental improvements in things like our information architecture, our navigation, our content layout, our templates over the last number of years. And if you look at the before and after, there's a distinct difference. But very, very few people over the course of those 3 years have actually noticed that things have changed. And that's what we want. We don't want them to notice that things have changed. We just want them to have a better and a better and a better experience as they visit our site and access the services through it. Moving into the next phase in 2016, 2017, we're looking to use optimization a lot more in how we drive the evolution of the site, using data to drive those decisions. Optimizing our search results based on activity, and employing a much more iterative test and learn approach to how we're deploying changes to the site. I'm going to go through a couple of before and after examples. Some of these will be very familiar to those of you that have worked on large complex sites, especially in the government space. This is our parking page where we allow residents to pay for those parking tickets that unfortunately they get from time to time. You can see on the left a really heavy, dense content, heavy site with a visually heavy background. We spent some time over the last while making minor tweaks and changes to move to the place on the right where you see enhanced use of visuals, less content, better visual design, all within the same framework, within the same branding and style. Part of what some departments in the city really like to do is give 100% of the information all of the time to the residents. We have, and we know this from our data, we have 80% of our residents that come to us for 20% of the information that we have about a particular program or a particular initiative. We have, on the left, a site related to our Greenest City Action Plan, which is one of the core city strategies. And you can see, I couldn't really even fit it on one screenshot. We have reams and reams and reams of content. So again, working with the business, making sure that they understand why we're doing it, employing data mechanisms like scroll tracking to show that people are actually only making their way through a certain portion of the content, and improving the visual appeal of some of these sites, grouping our information, grouping our content. Again, this is the digital strategy section of the site, so creating summary blocks so that we meet that 80-20 rule for the residents that are coming for information, grouping the information into realistic and sensible themes, and employing engaging visuals. And this is all fairly standard stuff when you think about private sector websites. When you come to a government website, for a lot of people, this is really, really new and really, really challenging. In terms of our City of Vancouver homepage, again, we've taken a data-driven approach, focused on the increased and improved access to our online services section, minor changes around our footer, again, that incremental approach to change. Towards the end of this year and early next year, we're going to be doing a slightly more impressive visual uplift. Again, we've got a layout on the left in terms of the wireframe there, where we've actually categorized the user needs and the page views that we're seeing on our City of Vancouver website. And when you bring that to a business unit, when you bring that to a client, and that's part of the conversation, it's really, really challenging or difficult for them to decide that they need a different section on the top, or they want a different approach, because the data tells a story that's really, really powerful and can help you make a lot of the cases around how you lay out your site. In terms of our navigation, anybody who's worked with a fairly large site will know that it's one of the big challenges that we all face. We've really focused on moving away from primary navigation that has 20, 30 sub-items into logical categorical grouping of services that we need to deliver. So in terms of the top section that we're looking at there, that's going to deliver approximately 44% of our user needs in that top section. And it's important that we're maintaining the flexibility within our architecture so that it's seasonal. We can change it depending on if it's property tax or if there's a particular event happening. So we respond to the needs of our users upfront without forcing them to go through a really complex and deep navigation path. So switching from digital channel on the web over to mobile for a moment, and talking really about that service delivery piece. In 2015, we launched a mobile application called Van Connect. If you are a Vancouver resident, I urge you to download it and play around with it. And even if you're just visiting the city, take a look and see what you think. We launched it with our Chief Digital Officer and the Mayor in May 2015. And really the core function of the Van Connect app is to bring the citizen and the resident so much closer to service delivery in the City of Vancouver. It allows them to report issues, stay connected to the city, and really empowers them to interact and engage with the city in a completely different way. In 2014, if you wanted to report an issue in your neighborhood or a problem with something that you saw, you would have to pick up the phone, call 311, spend a number of time talking to a citizen representative, and then there was no feedback loop to whatever may or may not have occurred after that. With digital tools and digital technology, we're in such a better position to bring the user so much closer to that, and report and examine how that performance has changed with this tool. So it's a pretty simple interface. It allows you to submit a request. I think we have about 56 requests on the app right now, and we're probably at our maximum. But you can do everything from reporting a pothole to a street light out to, in times of emergency, report significant events like street flooding or other things that are happening in your neighborhood. Abandoned vehicles is up there. It's one that's really popular. The app geolocates to where you are or allows you to input an address. And then given the connection that we have between the app and our internal work order systems, we use an API to pipe that data and that information right through into the work crews that are actually responsible for performing the response to that service request. So what this abstracts away from is the complexity of the organization that is the City of Vancouver. We have 13 lines of business, and depending on what type of abandoned garbage, you might see a different truck from engineering or a different truck from parks. The citizen doesn't need to know or doesn't really need to care about that. They just need to let us know about that and about the issue, and we take care of the rest on the back end. It's been quite a success since we launched. We've had about 31,000 service requests submitted through the app, approximately 20,000 downloads. There's a huge additional benefit to the city and to the resident, which is sort of under the wraps of this app. In the event of an emergency, and we've had a few of them over the last number of years in Vancouver. We've had an oil spill in our harbor here, which actually resulted in residents going to the beaches and wanting and volunteering to clean up oil that was washing up on the beach, which actually wasn't a safe thing to do. And we were able to leverage this app, in addition to our social channels, to push messages out to all of those residents that had the app in their pocket to say, hey, we actually don't want you going down to the beaches right now. Here's another way you can contribute. So there's a knock-on benefit to having this app on people's phones outside of that service delivery piece. In terms of the platforms, it's available both on iPhone and Android. It's about a 2-to-1 split in terms of the interaction on those platforms. But one interesting thing that we've seen is when we deployed the app through an iframe on our website and allowed people to submit service requests from their desktop, we saw quite an uptake in that. And it speaks a little bit to that digital divide. Not everybody has a mobile phone. Not everybody is connected, but maybe people can go to the library and use the services there, for example. So we've seen quite an uptake in people using the website to report service requests. So what are people reporting, and how is this being used? If you look at the top 10 service requests, you can kind of split them out into two main categories. The first one being abandoned garbage, which is happening quite a bit, I guess, and graffiti. So if you think about the functionality and the user experience of an app as you're walking down the street and you see a piece of graffiti, to call that, to explain where it is, it's on the pole, it's on the side of the wall, it's, I don't know, on a dumpster, that's a really broken and fractured user experience for somebody. You put that on an app and allow them to take a picture and submit that piece of evidence to the city because they're proud of their neighborhood and they want to clean up their neighborhood, then you start seeing why an app like this starts to make sense. Another interesting statistic here around the usage of the app is that we've had 36% of our service requests come in through what we call our BIAs. They're our business improvement associations. So these are associations of businesses that really want to look after their area of the city to promote their business activities, whether it's a coffee shop or a retail store. And prior to the VanConnect app being available, they would submit spreadsheets upon spreadsheets to the City of Vancouver on a weekly basis, which then took manual effort to decompile, decide which service requests went where, and start that channel. They've adopted to the app incredibly well and are now using the app to submit those service requests. And the efficiencies and the savings that we generate and by that, the value that we can deliver to the resident has increased greatly. I'll take you through a couple of case studies. So graffiti is the one I just talked about. You can see how much more popular the app is for reporting graffiti than it was before we had the app. One of the interesting ones that we had was we often get service requests coming to the City of Vancouver that have nothing to do with the City of Vancouver. It'll be on a BC Hydro box or a 24 Hours Metro newspaper box or whatever else. And it's actually not our asset. We don't own it. It's not our responsibility. But people tell us because they don't care. It's the city, right? And before the VanConnect app, these would languish in our work order systems for quite a while, and then we'd end up, finally getting around to sending it out to the respective agency, and we had no way to track if it got done or if it didn't get done. With the app, it's an immediate straight-through process using the API that pings a note to, in this case, the 24-hour news group or Canada Post or BC Hydro, and they then take responsibility for the closure of that service request, which can get reported back to the resident. So a completely step change in how that is handled in terms of a piece of work, and it cuts the city out of it entirely almost. Here's a case study. We had a person obviously was on their evening or morning walk down Hastings Street and identified 25 pieces of work that needed to be done along a strip. That would never have been called into the city, absolutely never, because they would have spent their entire walk on the phone. But we use, and the city, again, another layer of abstraction, the city uses a contractor to deliver graffiti cleaning services. So on October 12th, 25 service requests were created. It was all removed on the 13th. And all of those were closed with a report back to the citizen on the 14th. So in terms of service delivery, that end-to-end journey is just an enormous step change from what you would have been able to do prior to the app being in place. And we can report on it. And some of the reporting, which I'll show you now, is really interesting in terms of how we are delivering citizen services for our residents. Those of you who live in Vancouver may remember in 2015 we had essentially a drought. Maybe if you're from California, you're experiencing that in the summer months as well. And we really have a problem here because you look at the ocean and you look at the mountains and you see the snow-capped peaks and it rains a lot. So you don't think about drought hitting Vancouver. It doesn't really enter the consciousness. So people use drinking water that has been treated for all sorts of things. Washing the car, washing the driveway, I don't know, watering their lawn is the big one. And we had a huge number of, a huge challenge in 2015 about that. We have a bylaw in place that allows us to issue tickets against citizens that are repeatedly misusing drinking water when a drinking water restriction is in place. But we had no way to determine how to go about looking at that from a data perspective. By putting a service request on VanConnect and allowing residents, and it sounds a little bit like a snitch line, and you can call it that, but it's for the greater good, because if we run out of water, then we're all in trouble. Allowed residents to report to us where they felt there was a water violation taking place. And these are water violations that, are excessive use of drinking water, basically. And with that, in 2016, you can see there, and we didn't have the same issue in 2016, so I think it was times 10 in terms of volume in 2015. But we had about 400 requests come through, and you can see a heat map there of the city of Vancouver in terms of those areas of the city that are sort of most in violation, according to the input channel that we have here. And what we were able to do that with that data was, go back to our bylaw inspectors who essentially before that were blind in terms of where this may or may not have been happening, and provide them with at least one piece of data, one piece of input to show them, hey, maybe you want to think about concentrating your efforts down in this area of the city, because that's where we seem to be seeing that problem. So again, in terms of how we're delivering service to the residents, making sure that we have the right data and providing that to our internal groups to allow them to change how they do business as well. And this is a little bit of a non-conventional one, and maybe one that's very specific to Vancouver. In 2016, we worked with the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority, who are, I guess, the ones responsible for, needle pickup that are discarded needles around the city. And we worked with them, again, to provide this level of data back to them so that they could design their service better. Now, if you know Vancouver, you might know that there are going to be hotspots for this anyway, and how will another set of data, add to that? But there are things that pop out of here that maybe wasn't becoming clear. So you can see a trajectory moving out sort of from, the downtown core, which would be the obvious one, down into the Kingsway corridor. So maybe that's something that hadn't been identified before. And again, how can we help these real-world agencies change how they deliver service based on the data that we're collecting through these channels? Through, if you were to try and do that, a couple of years ago with just a phone channel, very, very difficult to do because you don't have this ability to generate the data as easily. Underlying all of this, of course, is the connectivity. Data and digital infrastructure was called out as a specific theme within the digital strategy because the people that were forming it realized, and very smartly so, realize that if you don't have the infrastructure in place, if you don't have the right pipes in place and the right connection points in place, all of this service delivery is going to fall apart. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Van Wi-Fi program, which was an initiative that we ran in partnership with TELUS to provide free anonymous Wi-Fi with no data caps at 43 locations around the city of Vancouver. Most of those locations are centered around where people sort of traditionally gather, and obviously where we have physical infrastructure and assets to put it in place. So I'm talking about community centers, some recreational facilities. Our city libraries also provide a network of free Wi-Fi. And some of the impacts of this, or some of the knock-on impacts of this are really quite profound. It supports, obviously, economic development. If you can, get access to Wi-Fi for testing your services or developing your business, it really speaks to the digital divide. Not everybody has a cell phone plan. Not everybody has easy, free access to devices to use. So by providing that sort of web of connectivity between the 43 enabled sites with TELUS and our libraries, we're really focused on that digital divide piece. I've spoken a little bit about emergency response. There's an underlying theme to everything we do in the city of Vancouver that speaks to resilience. Obviously, maybe we're in an earthquake zone. You probably do. And we're constantly thinking about resilience, redundancy, disaster recovery. And the more infrastructure we have in place to communicate with our residents, to provide residents with abilities to communicate back to us, we see that as a huge support framework that we're putting in place in the event of a major catastrophe. And then service competitiveness. If we're providing free Wi-Fi around the city, how does that encourage businesses to compete? How can people leverage that to add something to their service offering? Focusing in a little bit on the downtown east side. So for those of you not from Vancouver, the downtown east side is an area where the digital divide is very apparent. Many people have cell phones, but connectivity is absolutely an issue because they may have cell phones, but no cell plan. So we really focused on making sure that there was a good coverage of connectivity in some of our community centers and drop-in centers in the downtown Eastside. Because as the quote there goes, connectivity is no longer a luxury. In order to access some of the basic fundamental services that you need to engage in society, like finding a job, accessing government services, you need to be able to connect to the internet. And we're ensuring that as we progress digital strategy, which is a very forward-thinking and positive movement, that we make sure people don't get left behind by that. And it's really, really important in the city of Vancouver, where there is quite a visible digital divide and economic divide. So switching gears a little bit now to talk about the data opportunity. And I hope some of you in this room are really interested in the IoT, the opportunity that data is bringing to your organizations, where you can see connections between various data points or data collections that you might be aware of, and how those can unlock potential and unlock new services. And this speaks a little bit to engagement and access, but specifically as well to the digital economy. This is a quote my boss got off the internet, and I decided to use it. It's the foundation of every digital business, every touch point, every click. It's creating this digital exhaust and this data exhaust that if we capture and if we use, there's potential to harness and opportunity in. And I'm going to go through a couple of examples of where people have taken our data sets and made businesses out of them and made real change out of them. Our open data portal is not what I would like it to be, but we're working on it. We have about 150 data sets. It's at data.vancouver.ca. There is a program underway to improve the access to that via APIs and increase the number of data sets that we have there and the value of those. But that said, some people have really gone in there and made good use of it already. What are people downloading? So recently, our street trees, business license information, census data, crime data, and a digital elevation model, which is a spatial data set of the city. So you start thinking, okay, well, what are people doing with all of that? And here are some examples. So the crime data, this is an example from the VPD. I'm not taking credit for this. This is a police department project where you can see almost in real time a spatial map of crimes of different types that have taken place in Vancouver over the past period of time, and there's filters on there to change the time. So yeah, that's kind of interesting, and it might maybe determine, if you're making a decision about where you want to live or where you want to send your kid to school or where you want to park your car, you might start looking at this. But this gets really interesting if you think about how the police may be using it in terms of predictive analysis about what types of crimes occur in which areas and how to maybe prevent some of those crimes. So again, the opportunity here is taking a fairly simple data set that is an open data set and thinking about how it might be used. CBC did an interesting one a couple of years ago where they took all of our parking rate information and just put it on a simple map, right? So that's downtown core, red, yellow, green, where it's cheap and less cheap to park. There's opportunity here to take this to the next step and the next step. And I know there's some apps out there that do this already, but you could think about a combination of sort of your car-to-go app where you have a radius set around your current location, and you're asking and polling this data set to find you the cheapest parking within a distance as you drive around town. And when you then think about where we're going with autonomous vehicles and smart sensors in parking meters and smart sensors in streetlights, and you start putting those pieces together, there becomes this opportunity to stitch a lot of this together and see where that can take you. A little bit more of a practical example. So this is a company, if you're not familiar with them, I'd urge you to take a look at them. They're called Recollect. They started in Vancouver, and they started with a spreadsheet of our garbage collection data. And that sounds really sexy. I know, you're all really excited about that. The biggest call to our 301 call center every year is missed garbage collection. So people call and they complain that their garbage wasn't collected or the recycling wasn't collected. 70% of the time, we think it's not our fault, right? I'm going to say that. But no, 70% of the time, they maybe didn't put it out on time or they put it out on the wrong day. Today's a stat in Canada. I guarantee you that call will spike today because the city of Vancouver's off, but people still think, oh, Friday's my garbage day. I'm going to put my garbage out. So it changes. And it costs the city an enormous amount of time and money to service incorrectly categorized missed garbage calls. So these guys came along and they said, well, okay, you have a spreadsheet of all the data around where your garbage is being collected and when it's being collected and which zone it's being collected. And they built a very simple app that makes use of microservices like calendaring, scheduling, and messaging. They stitched that together with our data set. And now as a resident, I can input my address. I can get reminders the day before my garbage is due to be collected, my recycling is due to be picked up. And they've deployed this in hundreds of cities across North America and Canada. And it's all based on a simple data set and microservices. And identifying a need, right? Identifying a need that every single city has. And every single city knows when it's supposed to pick up your garbage. Whether we do or not, different story. So what's the city of Vancouver doing internally? This spreadsheet, or this dashboard is a little old. It's from earlier this year. But we really realized that if we were going to be talking about making data-driven decisions, we needed to start surfacing some of our data internally to support that. So what you're seeing here is just a performance dashboard of the digital channel. And it's not very comprehensive, but it does give us some insights into what's happening on our digital channel. And really what this was doing was setting the stage and setting the conversation for when we were able to do things like we're able to do now with our Van Connect app. So real quick, the performance, the life cycle of a service request is something like this. It gets submitted, we take it in, maybe it's over the phone, maybe it's through an email form. We assign it to a work group. Somebody goes out and cleans the graffiti or fixes the street light. And then we report on it. But at every point during this life cycle, a piece of data is being created. And it's stored somewhere. Maybe it's in an isolated system that the service provider over at the fulfill stage notes, or maybe it's at the submission stage when it was submitted. And what this has allowed us to do, especially with the launching of Van Connect, it's allowed us to take a look at our own performance metrics and our own stated service level agreements with our residents and start examining that. This is a proof of concept, and I apologize for the colors on there. It's not that easy to read. But essentially what we're able to do now is for any given service request that we're taking in, we can start evaluating our performance as an organization back to the resident and saying, yeah, you know what, for abandoned mattresses, which is what I think this one is, we've closed 70% inside our stated service level agreement. And that level of transparency and that level of feedback to the resident is something that you don't often get from government, but you really should be, because you're paying property tax and government is there to serve you. So again, I say this, this is a POC. We're moving towards this type of reporting and this type of data delivery. And for internal purposes, and I'm hoping that this will be made available again in the public domain as well. So where do we go from here? So that's some of the journey over the last number of years across those two pillars of the digital strategy. It's really about evolving service delivery to the citizens and making use of digital channels where possible. We did an assessment. The one done in 2012 was a really deep assessment done by PwC. The one we did in 2015, 2016 was certainly more of our evaluation, so it's inward looking. But we feel like we've moved the dial on a number of those areas that we looked at the start. Obviously, the world hasn't stood still. It's not like we're moving and nobody else is. So if we were to do that, comparison or evaluation against all those cities again, likely some of them would have maybe not had the same trajectory as us, but some of them have. Some of them have moved as well. So we recognize the need that just because digital strategy was a 4-year strategy and ended in 2016, we really need to continue to think about what's coming in 2017, 18, and further beyond. So with that digital strategy sort of 1.0, the one we've been working on, was really driven by changing citizen expectations. Citizens were expecting to see service delivery in a way that was defined by what they were experiencing in their private lives. And we kind of spent a bit of time catching up, right? We did some foundational work in the last number of years to really try and get onto that curve of what citizens were expecting. But the next stage is a little different. It's going to evolve a little bit quicker, and it's going to be of a different flavor, we feel. We think there's going to be a huge focus on connectivity and data, and how people are using data to deliver service more intelligently. And that's going to happen over the next couple of years, and we're already seeing that. We have smart city pilots related to things like connected streetlights, right? Which are going to send back data to us about when they're being turned on, the energy they're saving. So thinking about that and the data that's generating for us, and then moving forward into, later in the decade, that the concept of interoperability. So we're doing this, and so are our energy providers, and so are our hospitals, and so are our transportation networks. So how are we going to position ourselves as a city to make sure that we're interoperable from a data perspective, from a connectivity perspective, with all of those other initiatives, so that we can be a much more, and these are buzzwords, don't get me wrong, but how can we be a smart, intelligent, and connected city? So this is the fanciest slide, I guess, on my presentation. But if you think about it, if you start looking in there, it's really representative of the potential that is there for us to be an interconnected group of organizations. So whether it's an intelligent hospital, you're going to have autonomous vehicles, the data coming from our sensors in our parking meters, our street lights, our air quality. What are the challenges for a city in that world, and what are the challenges for a resident in that world as we move to this focus on interoperability once we figure out our data and connectivity. So that's my presentation. Thank you. You can find me. You can find me on Twitter, where I don't talk too much about this stuff. Or I'm always available at my email address at the City of Vancouver. And feel free to come chat to me afterwards. I'll be around for a little while. Thank you.